On paper, he is a titan of modern music, a mogul who shaped hip-hop, signed stars, and built an empire. In the headlines, he is a defendant in one of the most explosive celebrity trials of the decade. And in court papers and press conferences, prosecutors paint a portrait of a man who used power, wealth, and influence to arrange paid sexual encounters, some of them violent. Yet as a judge prepares to hand down a sentence, Sean Diddy Combs is doing something almost unthinkable. He is booking speaking events, public appearances, as if his future is already decided. Why is he so sure he'll walk free? This is a story of power, law, and celebrities gamble with fate. If you like deep investigative stories told like a film, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We break down the headlines and the hidden details. Sean Combs rose from public housing to the penthouses of pop culture. As Puff Daddy, Diddy, Bad Boy founder, and the architect behind a generation of stars, he wielded influence across music, fashion, and business. For decades, he was untouchable, the man who turned swagger into currency. But the same reach that lit the stage would, decades later, bring him under intense legal scrutiny. By the spring of 2024, allegations began to consolidate into formal legal action. A 17-page indictment accused Combs of running a long-standing scheme that involved flying individuals around the country for paid sexual encounters. He was ultimately tried on multiple counts, including racketeering and sex trafficking. While a jury later acquitted him of racketeering and sex trafficking, he was convicted on 2 counts under the federal Mann Act, a century-old statute that criminalizes transporting people across state lines for the purpose of prostitution or illicit sexual activity. That conviction set the stage for a sentencing hearing that would force both sides to argue not just punishment, but the meaning of culpability, celebrity, and responsibility in an age of public exposure. The trial unfolded like a courtroom drama written in real life. Witness after witness described episodes that prosecutors said were part of a pattern. Defense lawyers argued those stories were incomplete, inconsistent, and driven by motives other than truth. Headlines alternated between acquittal and guilty on different counts. Verdict sheets were parsed by legal analysts and fans alike. In July, jurors acquitted Combs on the most serious allegations, the racketeering and sex trafficking counts that might have led to decades behind bars. But they convicted him on 2 transportation for prostitution counts under the Mann Act, a conviction that, under federal sentencing guidelines, left real prison time on the table. Prosecutors moved for a stiff sentence, arguing that the crimes reflected a years-long pattern of coercion. The defense countered, asking for credit for time already served and urging leniency. The calculus, years versus months, would now be decided by a judge weighing not only the statute but Combs' conduct during and after case. During sentencing hearings, prosecutors highlighted acts they described as the height of hubris, public behavior that, in their view, demonstrated a lack of remorse. It was one of those moments, later mentioned in filings and press accounts, that many observers would return to when trying to explain Combs' public posture. The fact that he had accepted or scheduled appearances suggested a confidence bordering on defiance. In early October, as sentencing day approached, federal prosecutors told the court something that made headlines. Combs had booked speaking engagements and appearances in Miami and elsewhere, dates that fell immediately after the scheduled sentencing hearing. That disclosure became a central talking point for prosecutors, who argued that those bookings indicated a man who assumed he would be released or receive a sentence equal to time already served. To fans and to some legal analysts, the bookings looked like a calculated move. If Combs expected to be released on time served, scheduling appearances could protect business commitments and income. To prosecutors, they were evidence of lack of remorse. Hubris, as one filing put it. To others, they were merely business decisions made by a man with teams and agents, reactive to a complex calendar of commitments. The public was left to decide which reading made more sense, whether the bookings were naive optimism, routine risk management, or a tactical show of confidence. They had real consequences. Prosecutors introduced the events into the sentencing record. The judge, considering a pre-sentence investigation and weighing aggravating and mitigating factors, all but told the court he had noted the conduct. Defense lawyers pushed back, arguing that scheduling appearances did not prove anything about remorse or culpability. Still, the image of a superstar arranging his calendar while a federal sentence loomed would not easily fade. What does it say? In a legal sense, when a defendant books future public appearances before sentencing? The answer is not simple. On one hand, scheduling engagements is normal for artists and entrepreneurs who have teams making logistics decisions months in advance. On the other hand, in federal sentencing, optics matter. Judges consider not only the statutory factors, nature of the offense, criminal history, and harm, but also the defendant's conduct before, during, and after trial, including acceptance of responsibility. Combs' defense argued for a light sentence, in some filings, asking for roughly 14 months. Pointed his age, charitable work, expressed remorse in letters to the court, and time already served. Prosecutors pushed for a far harsher result, a term exceeding a decade, citing the seriousness of the conduct and the danger of minimizing it. In the middle, the judge grappled with sentencing ranges, precedent under the Mann Act, and how to weigh acquitted conduct that nevertheless showed up in the narrative of the case. That debate, whether acquitted conduct should influence sentencing, will become a centerpiece of the judge's deliberations. And yet beyond legal filings lies the realm of public relations. Combs' team sought to craft a narrative of transformation, public statements, carefully curated images, and a litany of professional accomplishments intended to remind both the public and the court of his contributions. Opponents painted that same narrative as self-promotion, a man leveraging fame to shape perceptions rather than take responsibility. Why did some commentators suggest that Combs might walk free? Partly it's the nature of the decision-making in large criminal cases. The jury had acquitted him on the most serious counts. Juries and judges are different institutions. Some former prosecutors and legal analysts noted that the acquittals created uncertainty about whether court would hand down a lengthy term. There were legal avenues, appeals, sentencing departures, arguments about the applicability and scope of the Mann Act. Those routes could reduce exposure. Add to that Combs' resources, teams of lawyers, PR operatives, and a financial ability to mount aggressive post-conviction strategies. Some former prosecutors told reporters they didn't think they would convict on certain counts, a comment that later got interpreted and replayed across social feeds. To supporters, these statements signal hope. The legal system might not return the outcome they feared. To critics, they were wishful thinking and an example of privilege in the justice system. Perhaps the most tangible reason people floated the walk-free scenario was this. Combs had time already served. He had been detained since his arrest, and the defense argued his time behind bars approximated any sentence that might be imposed. If the judge were persuaded that lengthy incarceration was not required, a sentence equal to time served would free him immediately. The combination of acquittals, time served, legal resources, and some public commentary from legal figures created fertile ground for the notion that he might not face long prison years. When a celebrity of Combs' stature becomes ensnared in a legal battle, the public discourse becomes polarized. Fans and musicians rallied. Some called for due process, others for compassion. Victims, advocates, and many in the #MeToo community saw the convictions as a sign the system could hold powerful men to account. Media outlets fed both narratives, with cable news cycles, morning shows, and social platforms offering competing frames. The bookings themselves became a media story. Was that scheduling reckless or pragmatic? Columns and op-eds debated whether a calendar move should influence sentencing. For journalists and creators, the image was irresistible. A mogul making business moves while a sentence was being debated, the optics crisp for headlines that would in turn shape public attitudes. The result was an echo chamber where actions fed commentary that fed further action, the modern feedback loop. Across interviews and legal analyses, expert voices tried to separate law from theater. Some former prosecutors argued that the judge could and might consider the bookings as evidence of lack of remorse or as a factor in determining a meaningful term. Others cautioned against overreading routine business, scheduling as determinative of sentiment or intent. One crucial legal debate turned on sentencing guidelines and whether the judge would consider acquitted conduct, incidents alleged but not proven to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Federal judges sometimes consider such conduct at sentencing, and when they do, it can raise sentences substantially. That prospect made many observers wonder whether acquittal on racketeering and trafficking would really protect Combs from serious time. Another point experts raised: federal sentencing districts and judges vary widely in how they apply the law. In this case, Judge Arun Subramanian had already signaled a careful, textual approach to the guidelines. But sentencing remains discretionary, and in moments of discretion, narratives and impressions matter as much as statutory math. Beyond precedent and PR lies a human toll. The trial featured testimony from people who said their lives were altered, who told stories that courtroom observers later described as painful and visceral. For every magazine spread about bookings and handbags, there were people whose account of harm were now part of the public record. Combs' defense framed his story differently. A man who recognized mistakes, who had letters of apology, who had spent time turned inward, and who had supporters attesting to the good he had done. In sentencing hearings, those letters and testimonials competed with testimony of harm, and the judge would have to weigh them both. If the judge would impose a sentence effectively equal to time served, or a brief term already served that amounted to immediate release, what would that mean? For Combs personally, it would mean freedom to resume business and performative life, at least in the short term. For the victims and for advocates, it could feel like a failure of accountability. For the music industry and for sponsors, it would raise immediate reputational questions. Who shares stages with whom, and how do brands respond to unresolved moral ambiguity? And legally, a short sentence or release would not necessarily end the story. Appeals and collateral civil litigation often follow criminal convictions and can go on for years. The Mann Act conviction, even if followed by a short term, would remain part of Combs' record and could have long-term implications for both liberty and reputation. Conversely, if the judge imposes a longer term, months or years, the consequences ripple outward. A lengthy federal sentence would signal to the public that even powerful cultural figures can be held to account. It could embolden other victims to come forward, and it would reshape conversations about industry culture. For Combs' businesses, the fallout would involve leadership transitions, contract renegotiations, and the very real absence of a founder. That reality, a possible long sentence for a man whose career spanned decades, is why many in the public kept watching, as if the whole culture were taking a breath. In the final submissions, both sides leaned hard into narrative. Prosecutors called the bookings an example of the defendant's comportment. Defense lawyers described them as business, as usual, and filed letters attesting to rehabilitation and good deeds. The judge read, listened, and asked questions that suggested he was thinking about ranges heavier than the defense requested. The pre-sentence report, a document that synthesizes facts, victim statements, and criminal history, loomed large. Those final days were not just about legal technicalities. They were about image, perception, and a culture trying to reconcile fame with accountability. So, what do the bookings tell us in the end? They tell us something about the collision of celebrity and criminal justice. A collision where calendars and courtrooms meet. They tell us the public craves simple narratives, guilty or innocent, free or punished, even though real life rarely bends so neatly. They remind us that law is partly about facts and partly about theater. What we do with evidence, how judges interpret behavior, and how power shapes outcomes. If Sean Diddy Combs walks free after sentencing, his supporters will call it vindication. His critics will call it a failure of the system. If he serves more time, supporters will lament and advocates will celebrate. Either way, the case will continue to be a reference point for legal scholars, for cultural critics, for anyone who wants to understand how justice and celebrity interact in the 21st century. If you found this deep dive useful, subscribe for more documentary-style breakdowns of the stories that shape our world. Drop a comment. Tell us what you think. Were the bookings a sign of hubris, business as usual, or something else? Like the video if you want more courtroom deep dives, and share this with someone who loves long-form stories. In a world where fame can feel like armor, the law is a reminder that armor has holes, and sometimes the holes are where the truth gets in